At this late hour the idea of pawning her little jacket occurred to her, but now she was far away from the city and its pawnshops, and there was no getting back. She walked on. An hour passed. She lost her sense of direction, became confused, knew not where she was going, turned corners and went up by-streets without knowing why, anything to keep moving, for she fancied that so soon as she stood still, the rat in the pit of her stomach gnawed more eagerly. At last she entered what seemed to be, if not a park, at least some sort of public enclosure. There were many trees. The place was beautiful. Well-kept roads and walks led sinuously and invitingly underneath the shade. Through the trees upon the other side of a wide expanse of turf, brown and sere under the summer sun, she caught a glimpse of tall buildings and a flagstaff. The whole place had a vaguely public, educational appearance, and Minna guessed from certain notices affixed to the trees, warning the public against picking of flowers, that she had found her way into the grounds of the State University. She went on a little farther. The path she was following led her, at length, into a grove of gigantic live oaks, whose lower branches all but swept the ground. Here the grass was green, the few flowers in bloom, the shade very thick. A more lovely spot she had seldom seen. Near at hand was a bench, built around the trunk of the largest live oak, and here, at length, weak from hunger, exhausted to the limits of her endurance, despairing, abandoned, Minna Hooven sat down to inquire of herself what next she could do. But once seated, the demands of the animal, so she could believe, became more clamorous, more insistent. To eat, to rest, to be safely housed against another night. Above all else, these were the things she craved. And the craving within her grew so mighty that she crisped her poor starved hands into little fists in an agony of desire, while the tears ran from her eyes, and sobs rose thick from her breast and struggled and strangled in her aching throat. But in a few moments Minna was aware that a woman apparently of some 30 years of age had twice passed along the walk in front of the bench where she sat, and now, as she took more notice of her, she remembered that she had seen her on the ferry-boat coming over from the city. The woman was gowned in silk, tightly corseted, and wore a hat of rather ostentatious smartness. Minna became convinced that the person was watching her, but before she had a chance to act upon this conviction, she was surprised out of all countenance by the stranger coming up to where she sat and speaking to her. "Here is a coincidence," exclaimed the newcomer as she sat down. "Surely you are the young girl who sat opposite me on the boat. Strange I should come across you again. I've had you in mind ever since." On this nearer view, Minna observed that the woman's face bore rather more than a trace of enamel, and that the atmosphere about was impregnated with sachet. She was not otherwise conspicuous, but there was a certain hardness about her mouth, and a certain droop of fatigue in her eyelids, which, combined with an indefinite self-confidence of manner, held Minna's attention. "Do you know," continued the woman, "I believe you are in trouble. I thought so when I saw you on the boat, and I think so now. Are you in trouble? You're from the country, ain't you?" Minna, glad to find a sympathizer, even in this chance acquaintance, admitted that she was in distress, that she had become separated from her mother, and that she was indeed from the country. "I've been trying to find a situation," she hazarded in conclusion, "but I don't seem to succeed. I've never been in a city before, except Bonneville." "Well, it is a coincidence," said the other. "I know I wasn't drawn to you for nothing. I am looking for just such a young girl as you. You see, I live alone a good deal, and I've been wanting to find a nice, bright, sociable girl who will be a sort of companion to me. Understand? And there's something about you that I like. I took to you the moment I saw you on the boat. Now, shall we talk this over?" Toward the end of the week, one afternoon, as Presley was returning from his club, he came suddenly face to face with Minna up on a street corner. "Ah!" he cried, coming toward her joyfully. "Upon my word, I had almost given you up. I've been looking everywhere for you. I was afraid you might not be getting along, and I wanted to see if there was anything I could do. How are your mother and Hilda? Where are you stopping? Have you got a good place?" "I don't know where Mamma is," answered Minna. "We got separated, and I never have been able to find her again." Meanwhile, Presley had been taking in with a quick eye the details of Minna's silk dress, with its garniture of lace, its edging of velvet, its silver belt-buckle. Her hair was arranged in a new way, and on her head was a wide hat with a flare to one side, set off with a gilt buckle and a puff of bright blue plush. He glanced at her sharply. "Well, but how are you getting on?" he demanded. Minna laughed scornfully. "I?" she cried. "Oh, I've gone to hell. It was either that or starvation." Presley regained his room at the club, white and trembling. Worse than the worst he had feared had happened. He had not been here soon enough to help. He had failed again. A superstitious fear assailed him that he was, in a manner, marked, that he was foredoomed to fail. Minna had come, had been driven to this, and he, acting too late upon his tardy resolve, had not been able to prevent it. Were the horrors, then, never to end? Was the grisly spectre of consequence to dance forever in his vision? Were the results, the far-reaching results of that battle at the irrigating ditch, to cross his path forever? When would the affair be terminated, the incident closed? Where was that spot to which the tentacle of the monster could not reach? By now he was sick with the dread of it all. He wanted to get away, to be free from that endless misery, so that he might not see what he could no longer help. Cowardly he now knew himself to be. He thought of himself only with loathing. Bitterly self-contemptuous that he could bring himself to a participation in such trivialities, he began to dress to keep his engagement to dine with the Cedarquists. He arrived at the house nearly half an hour late, but before he could take off his overcoat, Mrs. Cedarquist appeared in the doorway of the drawing-room at the end of the hall. She was dressed as if to go out. "My dear Presley," she exclaimed, her stout, overdressed body bustling toward him with a great rustle of silk. "I never was so glad. You poor, dear poet, you are thin as a ghost. You need a better dinner than I can give you, and that is just what you are to have." "Have I blundered?" Presley hastened to exclaim. "Did not Mr. Cedarquist mention Friday evening?" "No, no, no," she cried. "It was he who blundered. You blundering in a social amenity? Preposterous. No, Mr. Cedarquist forgot that we were dining out ourselves tonight, and when he told me he had asked you here for the same evening, I fell upon the man, my dear. I actually did, tooth and nail. But I wouldn't hear of his wiring you. I just dropped a note to our hostess, asking if I could not bring you, and when I told her who you were, she received the idea with, eagerness. So there it is, all settled. Cedarquist and the girls are gone on ahead, and you are to take the old lady like a dear, dear poet. I believe I hear the carriage. Come, into the carriage." Once settled in the cool gloom of the coupe, odorous of leather and upholstery, Mrs. Cedarquist exclaimed, "And I've never told you who you were to dine with. Oh, a personage, really. Fancy, you will be in the camp of your dearest foes. You are to dine with the Girard people, one of the vice-presidents of your bête noire, the P&S.W. Railroad." Presley started, his fists clenching so abruptly as to all but split his white gloves. He was not conscious of what he said in reply, and Mrs. Cedarquist was so taken up with her own endless stream of talk that she did not observe his confusion. "Their daughter, Honora, is going to Europe next week. Her mother is to take her, and Mrs. Girard is to have just a few people to dinner. Very informal, you know. Ourselves, you, and, I don't know, 2 or 3 others. Have you ever seen Honora? The prettiest little thing. And will she be rich? Millions. I would not dare say how many." Well, there you are. The coupe drew up to the curb, and Presley followed Mrs. Cedarquist up the steps to the massive doors of the great house. In a confused daze, he allowed one of the footmen to relieve him of his hat and coat. In a daze he rejoined Mrs. Cedarquist in a room with a glass roof, hung with pictures, the art gallery, no doubt, and in a daze heard their names announced at the entrance of another room, the doors of which were hung with thick blue curtains. He entered, collecting his wits for the introductions and presentations that he foresaw impended. The room was very large, and of excessive loftiness. Flat, rectagonal pillars of a rose-tinted, variegated marble rose from the floor almost flush with the walls, finishing off at the top with gilded capitals of a Corinthian design which supported the ceiling. The ceiling itself, instead of joining the walls at right angles, curved to meet them, a device that produced a sort of dome-like effect. This ceiling was a maze of golden involutions in very high relief, that adjusted themselves to form a massive framing for a great picture, nymphs and goddesses, white doves, golden chariots, and the like, all wreathed about with clouds and garlands of roses. Between the pillars, around the sides of the room, were hangings of silk, the design of a Louis XV type, of beautiful simplicity and faultless taste. The fireplace was a marvel. It reached from floor to ceiling. The lower parts, black marble, carved into crouching atlases, with great muscles that upbore the superstructure. The design of this latter, of a kind of purple marble, shot through with white veinings, was in the same style as the design of the silk hangings. In its midst was a bronze escutcheon, bearing an undecipherable monogram and a Latin motto. Andirons of brass, nearly 6 feet high, flanked the hearthstone. The windows of the room were heavily draped in sombre brocade and ecru lace, in which the initials of the family were very beautifully worked. But directly opposite the fireplace, an extra window, lighted from the adjoining conservatory, threw a wonderful, rich light into the apartment. It was a Gothic window of stained glass, very large, the center figures being armed warriors, Parsifal and Lohengrin, the one with a banner, the other with a swan. The effect was exquisite, the window a veritable masterpiece, glowing, flaming, and burning with 100 tints and colors, opalescent, purple, wine red, clouded pinks, royal blues, saffrons, violets so dark as to be almost black. Underfoot, the carpet had all the softness of texture of grass. Skins, one of them of an enormous polar bear, and rugs of silk velvet were spread upon the floor. A Renaissance cabinet of ebony, many feet taller than Presley's head, and inlaid with ivory and silver, occupied one corner of the room, while in its center stood a vast table of Flemish oak, black, heavy as iron, massive. A faint odor of sandalwood pervaded the air. From the conservatory nearby came the splashing of a fountain. A row of electric bulbs let into the frieze of the walls, between the golden capitals, and burning dimly behind hemispheres of clouded glass, threw a subdued light over the whole scene. Mrs. Gerard came forward. "This is Mr. Presley, of course, our new poet, of whom we are all so proud. I was so afraid you would be unable to come. You have given me a real pleasure in allowing me to welcome you here." The footman appeared at her elbow. "Dinner is served, madame," he announced. When Mrs. Hooven had left the boarding-house on Castro Street, she had taken up a position on a neighboring corner to wait for Minna's reappearance. Little Hilda, at this time hardly more than 6 years of age, was with her, holding to her hand. Mrs. Hooven was by no means an old woman, but hard work had aged her. She no longer had any claim to good looks. She no longer took much interest in her personal appearance. At the time of her eviction from the Castro Street boarding-house, she wore a faded black bonnet garnished with faded artificial flowers of dirty pink. A plaid shawl was about her shoulders. But this day of misfortune had set Mrs. Hooven adrift in even worse condition than her daughter. Her purse, containing a miserable handful of dimes and nickels, was in her trunk, and her trunk was in the hands of the landlady. Minna had been allowed such reprieve as her 35 cents would purchase. The destitution of Mrs. Hooven and her little girl had begun from the very moment of her eviction. While she waited for Minna, watching every streetcar and every approaching pedestrian, a policeman appeared, asked what she did, and, receiving no satisfactory reply, promptly moved her on. Minna had had little assurance in facing the life struggle of the city. Mrs. Hooven had absolutely none. In her, grief, distress, the pinch of poverty, and above all the nameless fear of the turbulent, fierce life of the streets, had produced a numbness, an embruted, sodden, silent, speechless condition of dazed mind and clogged, unintelligent speech. She was dumb, bewildered, stupid, animated but by a single impulse. She clung to life, and to the life of her little daughter Hilda, with the blind tenacity of purpose of a drowning cat. Thus, when ordered to move on by the officer, she had silently obeyed, not even attempting to explain her situation. She walked away to the next street crossing, then in a few moments returned, taking up her place on the corner near the boarding-house, spying upon the approaching cable cars, peeping anxiously down the length of the sidewalks. Once more the officer ordered her away, and once more, unprotesting, she complied. But when for the third time the policeman found her on the forbidden spot, he had lost his temper. This time, when Mrs. Hooven departed, he had followed her, and when, bewildered, persistent, she had attempted to turn back, he caught her by the shoulder. "Do you want to get arrested, hey?" he demanded. "Do you want me to lock you up? Say, do you? Speak up." The ominous words at length reached Mrs. Hooven's comprehension. Arrested! She was to be arrested! The countrywoman's fear of the jail nipped and bit eagerly at her unwilling heels. She hurried off, thinking to return to her post after the policeman should have gone away. But when, at length, turning back, she tried to find the boarding-house, she suddenly discovered that she was on an unfamiliar street. Unwittingly, no doubt, she had turned a corner. She could not retrace her steps. She and Hilda were lost. "Mammy, I'm tired," Hilda complained. Her mother picked her up. "Mammy, where are we going, Mammy?" Where indeed? Stupefied, Mrs. Hooven looked about her at the endless blocks of buildings, the endless procession of vehicles in the streets, the endless march of pedestrians on the sidewalks. Where was Minna? Where were she and her baby to sleep that night? How was Hilda to be fed? She could not stand still. There was no place to sit down. But one thing was left: walk. Ah, that Via Dolorosa of the destitute, that path of the cross of the homeless. Ah, the mile after mile of granite pavement that must be traversed. Walk they must. Move they must. Onward, forward, whither they cannot tell. Why, they do not know. Walk, walk, walk with bleeding feet and smarting joints. Walk with aching back and trembling knees. Walk, though the senses grow giddy with fatigue, though the eyes droop with sleep, though every nerve, demanding rest, sets in motion its tiny alarm of pain. Death is at the end of that devious, winding maze of paths, crossed and recrossed and crossed again. There is but one goal to the Via Dolorosa. There is no escape from the central chamber of that labyrinth. Fate guides the feet of them that are set therein. Double on their steps though they may, weave in and out of the myriad corners of the city streets, return, go forward, back, from side to side, here, there, anywhere, dodge, twist, wind, the central chamber where death sits is reached inexorably at the end. Sometimes leading and sometimes carrying Hilda, Mrs. Hooven set off upon her objectless journey. Block after block she walked, street after street. She was afraid to stop because of the policeman. As often as she so much as slackened her pace, she was sure to see one of these terrible figures in the distance, watching her, so it seemed to her, waiting for her to halt for the fraction of a second, in order that he might have an excuse to arrest her. Hilda fretted incessantly. "Mammy, where are we going, Mammy? I'm tired." Then, at last, for the first time, the plaint that stabbed the mother's heart. "Mammy, I'm hungry." "Be quiet, then," said Mrs. Hooven. "Pretty soon we'll have der supper." Passers-by on the sidewalk, men and women in the great 6 o'clock homeward march, jostled them as they went along. With dumb, dull curiousness, she looked into one after another of the limitless stream of faces, and she fancied she saw in them every emotion but pity. The faces were gay, were anxious, were sorrowful, were mirthful, were lined with thought, or were merely flat and expressionless, but not one was turned toward her in compassion. The expressions of the faces might be various, but an underlying callousness was discoverable beneath every mask. The people seemed removed from her immeasurably. They were infinitely above her. What was she to them, she and her baby, the crippled outcasts of the human herd, the unfit, not able to survive, thrust out on the heath to perish? To beg from these people did not yet occur to her. There was no pride, however, in the matter. She would have as readily asked alms of so many sphinxes. She went on. Without willing it, her feet carried her in a wide circle. Soon she began to recognize the houses. She had been in that street before. Somehow this was distasteful to her, so striking off at right angles, she walked straight before her for over a dozen blocks. By now it was growing darker. The sun had set. The hands of a clock on the powerhouse of a cable line pointed to 7. No doubt Minna had come along before this time, had found her mother gone, and just what had she done? Just what could she do? Where was her daughter now? Walking the streets herself, no doubt. What was to become of Minna, pretty girl that she was, lost, houseless, and friendless in the maze of these streets? Mrs. Hooven, roused from her lethargy, could not repress an exclamation of anguish. Here was misfortune indeed. Here was calamity. She bestirred herself, and remembered the address of the boarding-house. She might inquire her way back thither. No doubt by now the policeman would be gone home for the night. She looked about. She was in the district of modest residences, and a young man was coming toward her, carrying a new garden hose looped around his shoulder. "Say, mister, say, please." The young man gave her a quick look and passed on, hitching the coil of hose over his shoulder. But a few paces distant he slackened in his walk and fumbled in his vest pocket with his fingers. Then he came back to Mrs. Hooven and put a quarter into her hand. Mrs. Hooven stared at the coin, stupefied. The young man disappeared. He thought then that she was begging. It had come to that. She, independent all her life, whose husband had held 500 acres of wheat land, had been taken for a beggar. A flush of shame shot to her face. She was about to throw the money after its giver. But at the moment Hilda again exclaimed, "Mammy, I'm hungry." With a movement of infinite lassitude and resigned acceptance of the situation, Mrs. Hooven put the coin in her pocket. She had no right to be proud any longer. Hilda must have food. That evening she and her child had supper at a cheap restaurant in a poor quarter of the town, and passed the night on the benches of a little uptown park. Unused to the ways of the town, ignorant as to the customs and possibilities of eating-houses, she spent the whole of her quarter upon supper for herself and Hilda, and had nothing left wherewith to buy a lodging. The night was dreadful. Hilda sobbed herself to sleep on her mother's shoulder, waking thereafter from hour to hour to protest, though wrapped in her mother's shawl, that she was cold, and to inquire why they did not go to bed. Drunken men snored and sprawled near at hand. Toward morning a loafer, reeking of alcohol, sat down beside her and indulged in an incoherent soliloquy, punctuated with oaths and obscenities. It was not till far along toward daylight that she fell asleep. She awoke to find it broad day. Hilda mercifully slept. Her mother's limbs were stiff and lame with cold and damp. Her head throbbed. She moved to another bench which stood in the rays of the sun, and for a long 2 hours sat there in the thin warmth, till the moisture of the night that clung to her clothes was evaporated. A policeman came into view. She woke Hilda, and carrying her in her arms, took herself away. "Mammy," began Hilda as soon as she was well awake, "Mammy, I'm hungry. I want mine breakfast." "Sure, soon now, leetle doctor." She herself was hungry, but she had but little thought of that. How was Hilda to be fed? She remembered her experience of the previous day, when the young man with the hose had given her money. Was it so easy, then, to beg? Could charity be had for the asking? So it seemed, but all that was left of her sturdy independence revolted at the thought. She beg? She hold out the hand to strangers? "Mammy, I'm hungry." There was no other way. It must come to that in the end. Why temporize? Why put off the inevitable? She sought out a frequented street where men and women were on their way to work. One after another she let them go by, searching their faces, deterred at the very last moment by some trifling variation of expression, a firm-set mouth, a serious level eyebrow, an advancing chin. Then, twice, when she had made a choice, and brought her resolution to the point of speech, she quailed, shrinking, her ears tingling, her whole being protesting against the degradation. Everyone must be looking at her. Her shame was no doubt the object of 100 eyes. "Mammy, I'm hungry," protested Hilda again. She made up her mind. What, though, was she to say? In what words did beggars ask for assistance? She tried to remember how tramps who had appeared at her back door on Los Muertos had addressed her. How and with what formula certain mendicants of Bonneville had appealed to her. Then, having settled upon a phrase, she approached a whiskered gentleman with a large stomach, walking briskly in the direction of the town. "Say, den, please help a poor woman." The gentleman passed on. "Perhaps he don't hear me," she murmured. Two well-dressed women advanced, chattering gaily. Say, den, please help a poor woman." One of the women paused, murmuring to her companion, and from her purse extracted a yellow ticket, which she gave to Mrs. Hooven with voluble explanations. But Mrs. Hooven was confused. She did not understand. What could the ticket mean? The women went on their way. The next person to whom she applied was a young girl of about 18, very prettily dressed. Say, den, please help a poor woman." In evident embarrassment, the young girl paused and searched in her little pocketbook. I think I have just 10 cents here somewhere," she murmured again and again. In the end she found a dime and dropped it into Mrs. Hooven's palm. That was the beginning. The first step once taken, the others became easy. All day long Mrs. Hooven and Hilda followed the streets, begging. Here it was a nickel, there a dime, here a nickel again. But she was not expert in the art, nor did she know where to buy food the cheapest, and the entire day's work resulted only in barely enough for 2 meals of bread, milk, and a wretchedly cooked stew. Tuesday night found the pair once more shelterless. Once more Mrs. Hooven and her baby passed the night on the park benches. But early on Wednesday morning Mrs. Hooven found herself assailed by sharp pains and cramps in her stomach. What was the cause she could not say, but as the day went on the pains increased, alternating with hot flushes all over her body, and a certain weakness and faintness. As the day went on, the pain and the weakness increased. When she tried to walk, she found she could do so only with the greatest difficulty. Here was fresh misfortune. To beg she must walk. Dragging herself forward a half-block at a time, she regained the street once more. She succeeded in begging a couple of nickels, bought a bag of apples from a vendor, and, returning to the park, sank exhausted upon a bench. Here she remained all day until evening, Hilda alternately whimpering for her bread and milk, or playing languidly in the gravel walk at her feet. In the evening she started out again. This time it was bitter hard. Nobody seemed inclined to give. Twice she was moved on by policemen. 2 hours begging elicited but a single dime. With this she bought Hilda's bread and milk, and, refusing herself to eat, returned to the bench, the only home she knew, and spent the night shivering with cold, burning with fever. From Wednesday morning till Friday evening, with the exception of the few apples she had bought, and a quarter of a loaf of hard bread that she found in a greasy newspaper, scraps of a workman's dinner, Mrs. Hooven had nothing to eat. In her weakened condition, begging became hourly more difficult, and such little money as was given her she resolutely spent on Hilda's bread and milk in the morning and evening. By Friday afternoon she was very weak indeed. Her eyes troubled her. She could no longer see distinctly, and at times there appeared to her curious figures, huge crystal goblets of the most graceful shapes, floating and swaying in the air in front of her, almost within arm's reach. Vases of elegant forms, made of shimmering glass, bowed and curtsied toward her. Glass bulbs took graceful and varying shapes before her vision, now rounding into globes, now evolving into hourglasses, many twisting into pretzel-shaped convolutions. "Mammy, I'm hungry," insisted Hilda, passing her hands over her face. Mrs. Hooven started and woke. It was Friday evening. Already the street lamps were being lit. "Come den, little girl," she said, rising and taking Hilda's hand. "Come den, we go find supper, eh?" She issued from the park and took a cross street directly away from the locality where she had begged the previous days. She had had no success there of late. She would try some other quarter of the town. After a weary walk she came out upon Van Ness Avenue near its junction with Market Street. She turned into the avenue and went on toward the bay, painfully traversing block after block, begging of all whom she met, for she no longer made any distinction among the passers-by. Say, den, please help a poor woman." Mammy, I'm hungry." It was Friday night, between 7 and 8. The great deserted avenue was already dark. A sea fog was scudding overhead, and by degrees descending lower. The warmth was of the meagerest, and the street lamps, birds of fire in cages of glass, fluttered and danced in the prolonged gusts of the trade wind that threshed and weltered in the city streets from off the ocean. Presley entered the dining-room of the Gerard mansion with little Miss Gerard on his arm. The other guests had preceded them, Cedarquist with Mrs. Gerard, a pale-faced, languid young man, introduced to Presley as Julian Lambert, with Presley's cousin Beatrice, one of the twin daughters of Mr. and Mrs. Cedarquist. His brother Stephen, whose hair was straight as an Indian's, but of a pallid straw color, with Beatrice's sister. Gerard himself, taciturn, bearded, rotund, loud of breath, escorted Mrs. Cedarquist. Besides these, there were one or two other couples whose names Presley did not remember. The dining-room was superb in its appointments. On three sides of the room, to the height of some 10 feet, ran a continuous picture, an oil painting, divided into long sections by narrow panels of black oak. The painting represented the personages in the Roman de la Rose, and was conceived in an atmosphere of the most delicate, most ephemeral allegory. One saw young cavaliers, blue-eyed, of elemental beauty and purity, women with crowns, gold girdles, and cloudy wimples, young girls, entrancing in their loveliness, wearing snow-white kerchiefs, their golden hair unbound and flowing, dressed in white samite, bearing armfuls of flowers. The whole procession defiling against a background of forest glades, venerable oaks, half-hidden fountains, and fields of asphodel and roses. Otherwise the room was simple. Against the side of the wall unoccupied by the picture stood a sideboard of gigantic size that once had adorned the banquet hall of an Italian palace of the late Renaissance. It was black with age, and against its somber surfaces glittered an array of heavy silver dishes and heavier cut-glass bowls and goblets. The company sat down to the first course of raw Blue Point oysters, served upon little pyramids of shaved ice, and the two butlers at once began filling the glasses of the guests with cool eau sauterne. Mrs. Gerard, who was very proud of her dinners, and never able to resist the temptation of commenting upon them to her guests, leaned across to Presley and Mrs. Cedarquist, murmuring, "Mr. Presley, do you find that sauterne too cold? I always believe it is so bourgeois to keep such a delicate wine as sauterne on the ice, and to ice Bordeaux or Burgundy, oh, it is nothing short of a crime." "This is from your own vineyard, is it not?" asked Julian Lambert. "I think I recognize the bouquet." He strove to maintain an attitude of fin gourmet, unable to refrain from comment upon the courses as they succeeded one another. Little Honora Gerard turned to Presley. "You know," she explained, "Papa has his own vineyards in southern France. He is so particular about his wines, turns up his nose at California wines, and I am to go there next summer. Perrières is the name of the place where our vineyards are, the dearest village." She was a beautiful little girl of a dainty porcelain type, her coloring low in tone. She wore no jewels, but her little undeveloped neck and shoulders, of an exquisite immaturity, rose from the tulle bodice of her first décolleté gown. "Yes," she continued, "I'm to go to Europe for the first time. Won't it be gay? And I am to have my own bonne, and Mamma and I are to travel. So many places. Baden, Hamburg, Spa, the Tyrol. Won't it be gay?" Presley assented in meaningless words. He sipped his wine mechanically, looking about that marvelous room, with its subdued saffron lights, its glitter of glass and silver, its beautiful women in their elaborate toilets, its deft, correct servants, its array of tableware, cut glass, chased silver, and Dresden crockery. It was wealth in all its outward and visible forms, the signs of an opulence so great that it need never be husbanded. It was the home of a railway magnate, a railroad king. For this, then, the farmers paid. It was for this that S. Behrman turned the screw, tightened the vice. It was for this that Dyke had been driven to outlawry and a jail. It was for this that Lyman Derrick had been bought, the governor ruined and broken, Annixter shot down, Hooven killed. The soup, purée à la Derby, was served, and at the same time as hors d'oeuvres, ortolan patties, together with a tiny sandwich made of brown toast and thin slices of ham sprinkled with Parmesan cheese. The wine, so Mrs. Gerard caused it to be understood, was Xeres of the 1815 vintage. Mrs. Hooven crossed the avenue. It was growing late. Without knowing it, she had come to a part of the city that experienced beggars shunned. There was nobody about. Block after block of residences stretched away on either hand, lighted, full of people, but the sidewalks were deserted. "Mammy," whimpered Hilda, "I'm tired. Carry me." Using all her strength, Mrs. Hooven picked her up and moved on aimlessly. Then again that terrible cry, the cry of the hungry child appealing to the helpless mother. "Mammy, I'm hungry." "Ach, God, little girl!" exclaimed Mrs. Hooven, holding her close to her shoulder, the tears starting from her eyes. "Ach, little Tochter, don't. You preck my heart. I can't find any supper. We got nuddings to eat. Nuddings. When do we have those bread and milk again, Mammy?" "Tomorrow, soon. By and by, Hilda. I don't know what become of us now. What become of my little baby?" She went on, holding Hilda against her shoulder with one arm as best she might, one hand steadying herself against the fence railings along the sidewalk. At last a solitary pedestrian came into view, a young man in a top hat and overcoat, walking rapidly. Mrs. Hooven held out a quivering hand as he passed her. Say den, meester, please help a poor woman." The other hurried on. The fish course was grenadine of bass and small salmon, the latter stuffed and cooked in white wine and mushroom liquor. "I have read your poem, of course, Mr. Presley," observed Mrs. Gerard. "The Toilers, I mean. What a sermon you read us, you dreadful young man! I feel that I ought at once to sell all that I have and give to the poor. Positively, it did stir me up. You may congratulate yourself upon making at least one convert. Just because of that poem, Mrs. Cedarquist and I have started a movement to send a whole shipload of wheat to the starving people in India. Now, you horrid reactionary, are you satisfied?" "I am very glad," murmured Presley. "But I am afraid," observed Mrs. Cedarquist, "that we may be too late. They are dying so fast, those poor people. By the time our ship reaches India, the famine may be all over." "One need never be afraid of being too late in the matter of helping the destitute," answered Presley. "Unfortunately, they are always a fixed quantity. The poor ye have always with you." "How very clever that is," said Mrs. Gerard. Mrs. Cedarquist tapped the table with her fan in mild applause. Brilliant, she murmured. "Epigrammatical." "Honora," said Mrs. Gerard, turning to her daughter, at that moment in conversation with the languid Lambert, "Honora, listen, my dear. The spirit of our young Lamartine." Mrs. Hooven went on, stumbling from street to street, holding Hilda to her breast. Famine gnawed incessantly at her stomach. Walk though she might, turn upon her tracks up and down the streets, back to the avenue again, incessantly and relentlessly the torture dug into her vitals. She was hungry, and if the want of food harassed and rended her, full-grown woman that she was, what must it be in the poor starved stomach of her little girl? Oh, for some helping hand now! Oh, for one little mouthful, one little nibble! Food! All her racked body clamored for nourishment. Anything to numb those gnawing teeth. An abandoned loaf, hard, mouldered. A half-eaten fruit. Yes, even the refuse of the gutter, even the garbage of the ash-heap. On she went, peering into dark corners, into the areaways, anywhere, everywhere, watching the silent prowlings of cats, the intent rovings of stray dogs. But she was growing weaker. The pains and cramps in her stomach returned. Hilda's weight bore her to the pavement. More than once a great giddiness, a certain wheeling faintness all but overcame her. Hilda, however, was asleep. To wake her would only mean to revive her to the consciousness of hunger, yet how to carry her farther? Mrs. Hooven began to fear that she would fall with her child in her arms. The terror of a collapse upon those cold pavements, glistening with fog damp, roused her. She must make an effort to get through the night. She rallied all her strength, and pausing a moment to shift the weight of her baby to the other arm, once more set off through the night. A little while later she found on the edge of the sidewalk the peeling of a banana. It had been trodden upon, and it was muddy, but joyfully she caught it up. "Hilda," she cried, "wake up, little girl. See, look den, there's somethings to eat. Look den, eh? That's good, ain't it? Some banana. But it could not be eaten. Decayed, dirty, all but rotting, the stomach turned from the refuse, nauseated. "No, no," cried Hilda, "that's not good. I can't eat it. Oh, Mammy, please give me those bread and milk." By now the guests of Mrs. Gerard had come to the entrees. Londonderry pheasants, escallop of duck, and risolette à pompadour. The wine was Chateau Latour. All around the table conversations were going forward gaily. The good wines had broken up the slight restraint of the early part of the evening, and a spirit of good humor and good fellowship prevailed. Young Lambert and Mr. Gerard were deep in reminiscences of certain mutual duck-shooting expeditions. Mrs. Gerard and Mrs. Cedarquist discussed a novel, a strange mingling of psychology, degeneracy, and analysis of erotic conditions, which had just been translated from the Italian. Stephen Lambert and Beatrice disputed over the merits of a Scotch collie just given to the young lady. The scene was gay. The electric bulb sparkled, the wine flashing back the light. The entire table was a vague glow of white napery, delicate china, and glass as brilliant as crystal. Behind the guests the serving men came and went, filling the glasses continually, changing the covers, serving the entrees, managing the dinner without interruption, confusion, or the slightest unnecessary noise. But Presley could find no enjoyment in the occasion. From that picture of feasting, that scene of luxury, that atmosphere of decorous, well-bred refinement, his thoughts went back to Los Muertos and Quien-Sabe and the irrigating ditch at Hooven's. He saw them fall, one by one, Harron, Annixter, Osterman, Broderson, Hooven. The clink of the wine-glasses was drowned in the explosion of revolvers. The railroad might indeed be a force only, which no man could control and for which no man was responsible, but his friends had been killed. But years of extortion and oppression had wrung money from all the San Joaquin, money that had made possible this very scene in which he found himself. Because Magnus had been beggared, Gerard had become railroad king. Because the farmers of the valley were poor, these men were rich. The fancy grew big in his mind, distorted, caricatured, terrible. Because the farmers had been killed at the irrigating ditch, these others, Gerard and his family, fed full. They fattened on the blood of the people, on the blood of the men who had been killed at the ditch. It was a half-ludicrous, half-horrible dog-eat-dog, an unspeakable cannibalism. Harron, Annixter, and Hooven were being devoured there under his eyes. These dainty women, his cousin Beatrice and little Miss Gerard, frail, delicate, all these fine ladies with their small fingers and slender necks, suddenly were transfigured in his tortured mind into harpies tearing human flesh. His head swam with the horror of it, the terror of it. Yes, the people would turn some day, and turning, rend those who now preyed upon them. It would be dog-eat-dog again, with positions reversed. And he saw for one instant of time that splendid house sacked to its foundations, the tables overturned, the pictures torn, the hangings blazing, and Liberty, the red-handed man in the street, grimed with powder smoke, foul with the gutter, rush yelling, torch in hand, through every door. At 10 o'clock Mrs. Hooven fell. Luckily she was leading Hilda by the hand at the time, and the little girl was not hurt. In vain had Mrs. Hooven, hour after hour, walked the streets. After a while she no longer made any attempt to beg. Nobody was stirring, nor did she even try to hunt for food with the stray dogs and cats. She had made up her mind to return to the park in order to sit upon the benches there, but she had mistaken the direction, and following up Sacramento Street, had come out at length not upon the park, but upon a great vacant lot at the very top of the Clay Street hill. The ground was unfenced and rose above her to form the cap of the hill, all overgrown with bushes and a few stunted live oaks. It was in trying to cross this piece of ground that she fell. She got up on her feet again. "Ach, Mommy, did you hurt yourself?" asked Hilda. "No, no. Is that house where we get those bread and milk?" She got up on her feet again. "Ach, Mommy, did you hurt yourself?" asked Hilda. "No, no. Is that house where we get those bread and milk?" Hilda pointed to a single rambling building just visible in the night that stood isolated upon the summit of the hill in a grove of trees. "No, no, there ain't no bread and milk, leetle doctor." Hilda once more began to sob. "Ach, Mammy, please, please, I want it. I'm hungry." The jangled nerves snapped at last under the tension, and Mrs. Hooven, suddenly shaking Hilda roughly, cried out, "Stop, stop! Don't say it again, you! My God, you kill me yet!" But quick upon this came the reaction. The mother caught her little girl to her, sinking down upon her knees, putting her arms around her, holding her close. "No, no, cry all so much as you want. Say that you are hungry. Say it again. Say it all the time, over and over again. Say it, poor starving little baby. Oh, mine poor little doctor. Mein God, oh, I go crazy pretty soon, I guess. I can't help you. I can't get you nothings to eat. Nothings, nothings. Hilda, we going to die together. Put their arms around me so tight, little baby. We going to die. We going to find Papa. We ain't going to be hungry any more." "Where we go now?" demanded Hilda. "No places. Mommer's so tired. We stop here a little while and rest." Underneath a large bush that afforded a little shelter from the wind, Mrs. Hooven lay down, taking Hilda in her arms and wrapping her shawl about her. The infinite, vast night expanded gigantic all around them. At this elevation they were far above the city. It was still. Close overhead whirled the chariots of the fog, galloping landward, smothering lights, blurring outlines. Soon all sight of the town was shut out. Even the solitary house on the hilltop vanished. There was nothing left but gray, wheeling fog, and the mother and child, alone, shivering in a little strip of damp ground, an island drifting aimlessly in empty space. Hilda's fingers touched a leaf from the bush and instinctively closed upon it and carried it to her mouth. "Mammy," she said, "I'm eating those leaf. Is it good?" Her mother did not reply. "You going to sleep, Mammy?" inquired Hilda, touching her face. Mrs. Hooven roused herself a little. "Hey, what you say? Asleep? Yes, I guess I was asleep." Her voice trailed unintelligibly to silence again. She was not, however, asleep. Her eyes were open. A grateful numbness had begun to creep over her, a pleasing semi-insensibility. She no longer felt the pains and cramps of her stomach. Even the hunger was ceasing to bite. "Those stuffed artichokes are delicious, Mrs. Gerard," murmured young Lambert, wiping his lips with the corner of his napkin. "Pardon me for mentioning it, but your dinner must be my excuse." "And this asparagus, since Mr. Lambert has set the bad example," observed Mrs. Cedarquist, "so delicate, such an exquisite flavor. How do you manage?" "We get all our asparagus from the southern part of the state, from one particular ranch," explained Mrs. Gerard. "We order it by wire and get it only 20 hours after cutting. My husband sees to it that it is put on a special train. It stops at this ranch just to take on our asparagus. Extravagant, isn't it? But I simply cannot eat asparagus that has been cut more than a day." "Nor I," exclaimed Julian Lambert, who posed as an epicure. "I can tell to an hour just how long asparagus has been picked." "Fancy eating ordinary market asparagus," said Mrs. Gerard, "that has been fingered by heaven knows how many hands." "Mammy, Mammy, wake up!" cried Hilda, trying to push open Mrs. Hooven's eyelids, at last closed. "Mammy, don't. You're just trying to frighten me." Feebly, Hilda shook her by the shoulder. At last Mrs. Hooven's lips stirred. Putting her head down, Hilda distinguished the whispered words, "I'm sick. Go to sleep. Sick. Nothings to eat." The dessert was a wonderful preparation of alternate layers of biscuit glacé, ice cream, and candied chestnuts. "Delicious, is it not?" observed Julian Lambert, partly to himself, partly to Miss Cedarquist. "This Muscovite fouettée, upon my word, I have never tasted its equal." "And you should know, shouldn't you?" returned the young lady. "Mammy, Mammy, wake up!" cried Hilda. "Don't sleep so. I'm frightened." Repeatedly she shook her. Repeatedly she tried to raise the inert eyelids with the point of her finger. But her mother no longer stirred. The gaunt, lean body, with its bony face and sunken eye sockets, lay back, supine, upon the ground, the feet upturned and showing the ragged, worn soles of the shoes, the forehead and gray hair beaded with fog, the poor faded bonnet awry, the poor faded dress soiled and torn. Hilda drew close to her mother, kissing her face, twining her arms around her neck. For a long time she lay that way, alternately sobbing and sleeping. Then, after a long time, there was a stir. She woke from a doze to find a police officer and 2 or 3 other men bending over her. Someone carried a lantern. Terrified, smitten dumb, she was unable to answer the questions put to her. Then a woman, evidently a mistress of the house on the top of the hill, arrived and took Hilda in her arms and cried over her. "I'll take the little girl," she said to the police officer, "but the mother, can you save her? Is she too far gone?" "I've sent for a doctor," replied the other. Just before the ladies left the table, young Lambert raised his glass of Madeira. Turning toward the wife of the railroad king, he said, "My best compliments for a delightful dinner." The doctor, who had been bending over Mrs. Hooven, rose. "It's no use," he said. "She has been dead some time. Exhaustion from starvation." Chapter 9. The Last Chapter. On Division Number 3 of the Los Muertos Ranch, the wheat had already been cut, and S. Behrman, on a certain morning in the first week of August, drove across the open expanse of stubble toward the southwest, his eye searching the horizon for the feather of smoke that would mark the location of the steam harvester. However, he saw nothing. The stubble extended onward, apparently to the very margin of the world. At length S. Behrman halted his buggy and brought out his field glasses from beneath the seat. He stood up in his place and, adjusting the lenses, swept the prospect to the south and west. It was the same as though the sea of land were, in reality, the ocean, and he, lost in an open boat, were scanning the waste through his glasses, looking for the smoke of a steamer, hull down below the horizon. "Wonder," he muttered, "if they're working on 4 this morning." At length he murmured an "ah" of satisfaction. Far to the south, into the white sheen of sky, immediately over the horizon, he made out a faint smudge. The harvester, beyond doubt. Thither S. Behrman turned his horse's head. It was all of an hour's drive over the uneven ground and through the crackling stubble, but at length he reached the harvester. He found, however, that it had been halted. The sack sewers, together with the header man, were stretched on the ground in the shade of the machine, while the engineer and the separator man were pottering about a portion of the works. "What's the matter, Billy?" demanded S. Behrman, reining up. The engineer turned about. "The grain is heavy in here. We thought we'd better increase the speed of the cup carrier, and pulled up to put in a smaller sprocket." S. Behrman nodded to say that was all right, and added a question. "How is she going?" "Anywheres from 25 to 30 sacks to the acre right along here. Nothing the matter with that, I guess." "Nothing in the world, Bill." One of the sack sewers interposed. "For the last half hour we've been throwing off 3 bags to the minute." "That's good, that's good." It was more than good. It was bonanza, and all that division of the great ranch was thick with just such wonderful wheat. Never had Los Muertos been more generous, never a season more successful. S. Behrman drew a long breath of satisfaction. He knew just how great was his share in the lands which had just been absorbed by the corporation he served, just how many thousands of bushels of this marvelous crop were his property. Through all these years of confusion, bickerings, open hostility, and at last actual warfare, he had waited, nursing his patience, calm, with the firm assurance of ultimate success. The end at length had come. He had entered into his reward, and saw himself at last installed in the place he had so long, so silently coveted. Saw himself chief of a principality, the master of the wheat. The sprocket adjusted, the engineer called up the gang, and the men took their places. The fireman stoked vigorously, the 2 sack sewers resumed their posts on the sacking platform, putting on the goggles that kept the chaff from their eyes. The separator man and the header man gripped their levers. The harvester, shooting a column of thick smoke straight upward, vibrating to the top of the stack, hissed, clanked, and lurched forward. Instantly, motion sprang to life in all its component parts. The header knives cutting a 36-foot swath, gnashed like teeth. Belting slid and moved like smooth-flowing streams. The separator whirred, the agitator jarred and crashed. Cylinders, augers, fans, seeders and elevators, drapers and chaff carriers, clattered, rumbled, buzzed, and clanged. The steam hissed and rasped. The ground reverberated a hollow note, and the thousands upon thousands of wheat stalks sliced and slashed in the clashing shears of the header rattled like dry rushes in a hurricane as they fell inward, and were caught up by an endless belt, to disappear into the bowels of the vast brute that devoured them. It was that, and no less. It was the feeding of some prodigious monster, insatiable, with iron teeth, gnashing and threshing into the fields of standing wheat. Devouring always, never glutted, never satiated, swallowing an entire harvest, snarling and slobbering in a welter of warm vapor, acrid smoke, and blinding pungent clouds of chaff. It moved belly deep in the standing grain, a hippopotamus, half mired in river ooze, gorging rushes, snorting, sweating. A dinosaur, wallowing through thick, hot grasses, foundering there, crouching, groveling there, as its vast jaws crushed and tore, and its enormous gullet swallowed, incessant, ravenous, and inordinate. S. Merriman, very much amused, changed places with one of the sack sewers, allowing him to hold his horse while he mounted the sacking platform and took his place. The trepidation and jostling of the machine shook him till his teeth chattered in his head. His ears were shocked and assaulted by a myriad-tongued clamor, clashing steel, straining belts, jarring woodwork, while the impalpable chaff powder from the separators settled like dust in his hair, his ears, eyes, and mouth. Directly in front of where he sat on the platform was the chute from the cleaner, and from this into the mouth of a half-full sack spouted an unending gush of grain, winnowed, cleaned, threshed, ready for the mill. The pour from the chute of the cleaner had for S. Behrman an immense satisfaction. Without an instant's pause, a thick rivulet of wheat rolled and dashed tumultuous into the sack. In half a minute, sometimes in 20 seconds, the sack was full, was passed over to the second sewer, the mouth reeved up, and the sack dumped out upon the ground, to be picked up by the wagons and hauled to the railroad. S. Behrman, hypnotized, sat watching that river of grain. All that shrieking, bellowing machinery, all that gigantic organism, all the months of labor, the plowing, the planting, the prayers for rain, the years of preparation, the heartaches, the anxiety, the foresight, all the whole business of the ranch, the work of horses, of steam, of men and boys, looked to this spot, the grain chute from the harvester into the sacks. Its volume was the index of failure or success, of riches or poverty. And at this point the labor of the rancher ended. Here at the lip of the chute he parted company with his grain, and from here the wheat streamed forth to feed the world. The yawning mouths of the sacks might well stand for the unnumbered mouths of the people, all agape for food. And here into these sacks, at first so lean, so flaccid, attenuated like starved stomachs, rushed the living stream of food, insistent, interminable, filling the empty, fattening the shriveled, making it sleek and heavy and solid. Half an hour later the harvester stopped again. The men on the sacking platform had used up all the sacks. But S. Behrman's foreman, a new man on Los Muertos, put in an appearance with the report that the wagon bringing a fresh supply was approaching. "How is the grain elevator at Port Costa getting on, sir?" "Finished," replied S. Behrman. The new master of Los Muertos had decided upon accumulating his grain in bulk in a great elevator at the Tidewater port, where the grain ships for Liverpool and the East took on their cargoes. To this end he had bought and greatly enlarged a building at Port Costa that was already in use for that purpose, and to this elevator all the crop of Los Muertos was to be carried. The P&SW made S. Behrman a special rate. "By the way," said S. Behrman to his superintendent, "we're in luck. Fallon's buyer was in Bonneville yesterday. He's buying for Fallon and for Holt, too. I happened to run into him, and I've sold a shipload." "A shipload?" "Of Los Muertos wheat. He's acting for some Indian Famine Relief Committee. Lot of women people up in the city, and wanted a whole cargo. I made a deal with him. There's about 50,000 tons of disengaged shipping in San Francisco Bay right now, and ships are fighting for charters. I wired McKissick and got a long-distance telephone from him this morning. He got me a bark, the Swan Hilda. She'll dock day after tomorrow and begin loading. Hadn't I better take a run up, observed the superintendent, and keep an eye on things? No, answered S. Behrman. I want you to stop down here and see that those carpenters hustle the work in the ranch house. Derrick will be out by then. You see, this deal is peculiar. I'm not selling to any middleman, not to Fallon's buyer. He only put me on to the thing. I'm acting direct with these women people, and I've got to have some hand in shipping this stuff myself. But I made my selling figure cover the price of a charter. It's a queer, mixed-up deal, and I don't fancy it much, but there's a boodle in it. I'll go to Port Costa myself. A little later on in the day, when S. Behrman had satisfied himself that his harvesting was going forward favorably, he re-entered his buggy and, driving to the county road, turned southward toward the Los Muertos ranch house. He had not gone far, however, before he became aware of a familiar figure on horseback, jogging slowly along ahead of him. He recognized Presley. He shook the reins over his horse's back, and very soon, ranging up by the side of the young man, passed the time of day with him. "Well, what brings you down here again, Mr. Presley?" he observed. "I thought we had seen the last of you." "I came down to say good-bye to my friends," answered Presley shortly. "Going away?" "Yes, to India." "Well, upon my word, for your health, hey?" "Yes." "You look knocked up," asserted the other. "By the way," he added, "I suppose you've heard the news." Presley shrank a little. Of late the reports of disasters had followed so swiftly upon one another that he had begun to tremble and to quail at every unexpected bit of information. "What news do you mean?" he asked. "About Dyke. He has been convicted. The judge sentenced him for life." For life. Riding on by the side of this man through the ranches of the county road, Presley repeated these words to himself till the full effect of them burst at last upon him. Jailed for life. No outlook, no hope for the future. Day after day, year after year, to tread the rounds of the same gloomy monotony. He saw the gray stone walls, the iron doors, the flagging of the yard bare of grass or trees, the cell, narrow, bald, cheerless, the prison garb, the prison fare, and round all the grim granite of insuperable barriers, shutting out the world, shutting in the man with outcasts, with the pariah dogs of society, thieves, murderers, men below the beasts, lost to all decency, drugged with opium, utter reprobates. To this Dyke had been brought, Dyke than whom no man had been more honest, more courageous, more jovial. This was the end of him, a prison. This was his final estate, a criminal. Presley found an excuse for riding on, leaving S. Behrman behind him. He did not stop at Carraher's saloon, for the heat of his rage had long since begun to cool, and dispassionately he saw things in their true light. For all the tragedy of his wife's death, Carraher was none the less an evil influence among the ranchers, an influence that worked only to the inciting of crime. Unwilling to venture himself, to risk his own life, the anarchist saloon-keeper had goaded Dyke and Presley both to murder. A bad man, a plague spot in the world of the ranchers, poisoning the farmers' bodies with alcohol and their minds with discontent. At last Presley arrived at the ranch house of Los Muertos. The place was silent. The grass on the lawn was half dead and over a foot high. The beginnings of weeds showed here and there in the driveway. He tied his horse to a ring in the trunk of one of the larger eucalyptus trees and entered the house. Mrs. Derrick met him in the dining room. The old look of uneasiness, almost of terror, had gone from her wide-open brown eyes. There was in them, instead, the expression of one to whom a contingency long dreaded has arrived and passed. The stolidity of a settled grief, of an irreparable calamity, of a despair from which there was no escape was in her look, her manner, her voice. She was listless, apathetic, calm with the calmness of a woman who knows she can suffer no further. "We are going away," she told Presley as the two sat down at opposite ends of the dining table. "Just Magnus and myself. All there is left of us. There is very little money left. Magnus can hardly take care of himself, to say nothing of me. I must look after him now. We are going to Marysville." "Why there?" "You see," she explained, "it happens that my old place is vacant in the seminary there. I am going back to teach literature." She smiled wearily. "It is beginning all over again, isn't it? Only there is nothing to look forward to now. Magnus is an old man already, and I must take care of him." "He will go with you then," Presley said. "That will be some comfort to you, at least." "I don't know," she said slowly. "You have not seen Magnus lately." "Is he? How do you mean? Isn't he any better?" "Would you like to see him? He is in the office. You can go right in." Presley rose. He hesitated a moment, then, "Mrs. Annixter," he asked. "Hilma, is she still with you? I should like to see her before I go." "Go in and see Magnus," said Mrs. Derrick. "I will tell her you are here." Presley stepped across the stone-paved hallway with the glass roof, and after knocking 3 times at the office door, pushed it open and entered. Magnus sat in the chair before the desk and did not look up as Presley entered. He had the appearance of a man nearer 80 than 60. All the old-time erectness was broken and bent. It was as though the muscles that once had held the back rigid, the chin high, had softened and stretched. A certain fatness, the obesity of inertia, hung heavy around the hips and abdomen. The eye was watery and vague, the cheeks and chin unshaven and unkempt. The gray hair had lost its forward curl toward the temples and hung thin and ragged around the ears. The hawk-like nose seemed hooked to meet the chin. The lips were slack, the mouth half-opened. Where once the governor had been a model of neatness in his dress, the frock-coat buttoned, the linen clean, he now sat in his shirt-sleeves, the waistcoat open and showing the soiled shirt. His hands were stained with ink, and these, the only members of his body that yet appeared to retain their activity, were busy with a great pile of papers, oblong legal documents that littered the table before him. Without a moment's cessation, these hands of the governor's came and went among the papers, deft, nimble, dexterous. Magnus was sorting papers. From the heap upon his left hand he selected a document, opened it, glanced over it, then tied it carefully and laid it away upon a second pile on his right hand. When all the papers were in one pile, he reversed the process, taking from his right hand to place upon his left, then back from left to right again, then once more from right to left. He spoke no word. He sat absolutely still. Even his eyes did not move. Only his hands, swift, nervous, agitated, seemed alive. "Why, how are you, Governor?" said Presley, coming forward. Magnus turned slowly about and looked at him and at the hand in which he shook his own. "Ah," he said at length, "Presley, yes." Then his glance fell, and he looked aimlessly about upon the floor. "I've come to say good-bye, Governor," continued Presley. "I'm going away." "Going away?" "Yes, why, it's Presley. Good day, Presley." "Good day, Governor. I'm going away. I've come to say good-bye." "Good-bye?" Magnus bent his brows. "What are you saying good-bye for?" "I'm going away, sir." The governor did not answer. Staring at the ledge of the desk, he seemed lost in thought. There was a long silence. Then, at length, Presley said, "How are you getting on, Governor?" Magnus looked up slowly. "Why, it's Presley," he said. "How do you do, Presley?" "Are you getting on all right, sir?" "Yes," said Magnus after a while. "Yes, all right. I am going away. I've come to say good-bye." "No," he interrupted himself with a deprecatory smile. "You said that, didn't you?" "Well, you are going away too, your wife tells me." "Yes, I'm going away. I can't stay on." He hesitated a long time, groping for the right word. "I can't stay on, what's the name of this place?" "Los Muertos," put in Presley. "No, it isn't." "Yes, it is, too. That's right. Los Muertos. I don't know where my memory has gone to of late." "Well, I hope you will be better soon, Governor." As Presley spoke the words, S. Behrman entered the room, and the governor sprang up with unexpected agility and stood against the wall, drawing one long breath after another, watching the railroad agent with intent eyes. S. Behrman saluted both men affably and sat down near the desk, drawing the links of his heavy watch chain through his fat fingers. "There wasn't anybody outside when I knocked, but I heard your voice in here, Governor, so I came right in. I wanted to ask you, Governor, if my carpenters can begin work in here day after tomorrow. I want to take down that partition there and throw this room and the next into one. I guess that will be okay, won't it? You'll be out of here by then, won't you?" There was no vagueness about Magnus' speech or manner now. There was that same alertness in his demeanor that one sees in a tamed lion in the presence of its trainer. "Yes, yes," he said quickly. "You can send your men here. I will be gone by tomorrow." "I don't want to seem to hurry you, Governor." "No, you will not hurry me. I am ready to go now." "Anything I can do for you, Governor?" "Nothing." "Yes, there is, Governor," insisted S. Behrman. "I think now that all is over we ought to be good friends. I think I can do something for you. We still want an assistant in the local freight manager's office. Now what do you say to having a try at it? There's a salary of $50 a month goes with it. I guess you must be in need of money now, and there's always the wife to support. What do you say? Will you try the place?" Presley could only stare at the man in speechless wonder. What was he driving at? What reason was there back of this new move, and why should it be made thus openly and in his hearing? An explanation occurred to him. Was this merely a pleasantry on the part of S. Behrman, a way of enjoying to the full his triumph? Was he testing the completeness of his victory, trying to see just how far he could go, how far beneath his feet he could push his old-time enemy? "What do you say?" he repeated. "Will you try the place?" You insist?" inquired the governor. "Oh, I'm not insisting on anything," cried S. Behrman. "I'm offering you a place, that's all. Will you take it?" Yes, I'll take it." "You'll come over to our side?" "Yes, I'll come over." "You'll have to turn railroad, understand?" "I'll turn railroad." "Guess there may be times when you'll have to take orders from me." "I'll take orders from you." "You'll have to be loyal to railroad, you know. No funny business." "I'll be loyal to the railroad." "You would like the place, then?" "Yes." S. Behrman turned from Magnus, who at once resumed his seat and began again to sort his papers. "Well, Presley," said the railroad agent, "I guess I won't see you again." "I hope not," answered the other. "Tut, tut, Presley, you know you can't make me angry." He put on his hat of varnished straw and wiped his fat forehead with his handkerchief. Of late he had grown fatter than ever, and the linen vest, stamped with the multitude of interlocked horseshoes, strained tight its imitation pearl buttons across the great protuberant stomach. Presley looked at the man a moment before replying. But a few weeks ago he could not thus have faced the great enemy of the farmers without a gust of blind rage blowing tempestuous through all his bones. Now, however, he found to his surprise that his fury had lapsed to a profound contempt, in which there was bitterness but no truculence. He was tired to death of the whole business. "Yes," he answered deliberately, "I am going away. You have ruined this place for me. I couldn't live here where I should have to see you or the results of what you have done whenever I stirred out of doors." "Nonsense, Presley," answered the other, refusing to become angry. "That's foolishness, that kind of talk. Though, of course, I understand how you feel. I guess it was you, wasn't it, who threw that bomb into my house?" "It was." "Well, that don't show any common sense, Presley," returned S. Behrman with perfect aplomb. "What could you have gained by killing me?" "Not so much, probably, as you have gained by killing Harron and Annixter. But that's all past now. You're safe from me." The strangeness of this talk, the oddity of the situation, burst upon him, and he laughed aloud. "It don't seem as though you could be brought to book, S. Behrman, by anybody or by any means, does it? They can't get at you through the courts. The law can't get you. Dyke's pistol missed fire for just your benefit, and you even escaped Caraher's 6 inches of plugged gas pipe. Just what are we going to do with you?" "Best give it up, Press, my boy," returned the other. "I guess there ain't anything can touch me." "Well, Magnus," he said, turning once more to the governor, "well, I'll think over what you say and let you know if I can get the place for you in a day or two. You see," he added, "you're getting pretty old, Magnus Derrick." Presley flung himself from the room, unable any longer to witness the depths into which Magnus had fallen. What other scenes of degradation were enacted in that room, how much further S. Behrman carried the humiliation, he did not know. He suddenly felt that the air of the office was choking him. He hurried up to what once had been his own room. On his way he could not but note that much of the house was in disarray. A great packing up was in progress. Trunks, half full, stood in the hallways. Crates and cases in a litter of straw encumbered the rooms. The servants came and went with armfuls of books, ornaments, articles of clothing. Presley took from his room only a few manuscripts and notebooks, and a small valise full of his personal effects. At the doorway he paused, and, holding the knob of the door in his hand, looked back into the room a very long time. He descended to the lower floor and entered the dining room. Mrs. Derrick had disappeared. Presley stood for a long moment in front of the fireplace, looking about the room, remembering the scenes that he had witnessed there. The conference when Osterman had first suggested the fight for railroad commissioner, and then later the attack on Lyman Derrick and the sudden revelation of that inconceivable treachery. But as he stood considering these things, a door to his right opened, and Hilma entered the room. Presley came forward, holding out his hand, all unable to believe his eyes. It was a woman, grave, dignified, composed, who advanced to meet him. Hilma was dressed in black, the cut and fashion of the gown severe, almost monastic. All the little feminine and contradictory daintinesses were nowhere to be seen. Her statuesque calm evenness of contour yet remained, but it was the calmness of great sorrow, of infinite resignation. Beautiful she still remained, but she was older. The seriousness of one who has gained the knowledge of the world, knowledge of its evil, seemed to envelop her. The calm gravity of a great suffering past, but not forgotten, sat upon her. Not yet 21, she exhibited the demeanor of a woman of 40. The one-time amplitude of her figure, the fullness of hip and shoulder, the great deep swell from waist to throat were gone. She had grown thinner, and, in consequence, seemed unusually, almost unnaturally tall. Her neck was slender, the outline of her full lips and round chin was a little sharp. Her arms, those wonderful, beautiful arms of hers, were a little shrunken. But her eyes were as wide open as always, rimmed as ever by the thin, intensely black line of the lashes, and her brown, fragrant hair was still thick, still, at times, glittered and coruscated in the sun. When she spoke, it was with the old-time velvety huskiness of voice that Annixter had learned to love so well. "Oh, it is you," she said, giving him her hand. "You were good to want to see me before you left. I hear that you are going away." She sat down upon the sofa. "Yes," Presley answered, drawing a chair near to her. "Yes, I felt I could not stay down here any longer. I am going to take a long ocean voyage. My ship sails in a few days. But you, Mrs. Annixter, what are you going to do? Is there any way I can serve you?" "No," she answered, "nothing. Papa is doing well. We are living here now." "You are well?" She made a little helpless gesture with both her hands, smiling very sadly. "As you see," she answered. As he talked, Presley was looking at her intently. Her dignity was a new element in her character, and the certain slender effect of her figure, emphasized now by the long folds of the black gown she wore, carried it almost superbly. She conveyed something of the impression of a queen in exile. But she had lost none of her womanliness, rather the contrary. Adversity had softened her as well as deepened her. Presley saw that very clearly. Hilma had arrived now at her perfect maturity. She had known great love, and she had known great grief, and the woman that had awakened in her with her affection for Annixter had been strengthened and infinitely ennobled by his death. What if things had been different? Thus, as he conversed with her, Presley found himself wondering. Her sweetness, her beautiful gentleness and tenderness were almost like palpable presences. It was almost as if a caress had been laid softly upon his cheek, as if a gentle hand closed upon his. Here, he knew, was sympathy. Here, he knew, was an infinite capacity for love. Then, suddenly, all the tired heart of him went out toward her. A longing to give the best that was in him to the memory of her, to be strong and noble because of her, to reshape his purposeless, half-wasted life with her nobility and purity and gentleness for his inspiration, leaped all at once within him, leaped and stood firm, hardening to a resolve stronger than any he had ever known. For an instant he told himself that the suddenness of this new emotion must be evidence of its insincerity. He was perfectly well aware that his impulses were abrupt and of short duration. But he knew that this was not sudden. Without realizing it, he had been from the first drawn to Hilma, and all through these last terrible days, since the time he had seen her at Los Muertos, just after the battle at the ditch, she had obtruded continually upon his thoughts. The sight of her today, more beautiful than ever, quiet, strong, reserved, had only brought matters to a culmination. "Are you," he asked her, "are you so unhappy, Hilma, that you can look forward to no more brightness in your life?" "Unless I could forget my husband," she answered, "how can I be happy? I would rather be unhappy in remembering him than happy in forgetting him. He was my whole world, literally and truly. Nothing seemed to count before I knew him, and nothing can count for me now after I have lost him." "You think now," he answered, "that in being happy again you would be disloyal to him? But you will find after a while, years from now, that it need not be so. The part of you that belongs to your husband can always keep him sacred. That part of you belongs to him, and he to it. But you are young. You have all your life to live yet. Your sorrow need not be a burden to you. If you consider it as you should, as you will some day, believe me, it will only be a great help to you. It will make you more noble, a truer woman, more generous." "I think I see," she answered, "and I never thought about it in that light before." "I want to help you," he answered, "as you have helped me. I want to be your friend, and above all things I do not want to see your life wasted. I am going away, and it is quite possible I shall never see you again, but you will always be a help to me." "I do not understand," she answered, "but I know you mean to be very, very kind to me. Yes, I hope when you come back, if you ever do, you will still be that. I do not know why you should want to be so kind, unless, yes, of course, you are my husband's dearest friend." They talked a little longer, and at length Presley rose. "I cannot bring myself to see Mrs. Derrick again," he said. "It would only serve to make her very unhappy. Will you explain that to her? I think she will understand." "Yes," answered Hilma, "yes, I will." There was a pause. There seemed to be nothing more for either of them to say. Presley held out his hand. "Good-bye," she said, as she gave him hers. He carried it to his lips. "Good-bye," he answered. "Good-bye, and may God bless you." He turned away abruptly and left the room. But as he was quietly making his way out of the house, hoping to get to his horse unobserved, he came suddenly upon Mrs. Dyke and Sidney on the porch of the house. He had forgotten that since the affair at the ditch, Los Muertos had been a home to the engineer's mother and daughter. "And you, Mrs. Dyke," he asked as he took her hand, "in this break-up of everything, where do you go?" "To the city," she answered, "to San Francisco. I have a sister there who will look after the little tad." "But you, how about yourself, Mrs. Dyke?" She answered him in a quiet voice, monotonous, expressionless. "I am going to die very soon, Mr. Presley. There is no reason why I should live any longer. My son is in prison for life. Everything is over for me, and I am tired, worn out." "You mustn't talk like that, Mrs. Dyke," protested Presley. "Nonsense. You will live long enough to see the little tad married." He tried to be cheerful, but he knew his words lacked the ring of conviction. Death already overshadowed the face of the engineer's mother. He felt that she spoke the truth, and as he stood there speaking to her for the last time, his arm about little Sidney's shoulder, he knew that he was seeing the beginnings of the wreck of another family, and that, like Hilda Hooven, another baby girl was to be started in life, through no fault of hers, fearfully handicapped, weighed down at the threshold of existence with a load of disgrace. Hilda Hooven and Sidney Dyke, what was to be their histories? The one sister of an outcast, the other daughter of a convict. And he thought of that other young girl, the little Honora Gerard, the heiress of millions, petted, loved, receiving adulation from all who came near to her, whose only care was to choose from among the multitude of pleasures that the world hastened to present to her consideration. "Good-bye," he said, holding out his hand. "Good-bye. Good-bye, Sidney." He kissed the little girl, clasped Mrs. Dyke's hand a moment with his, then, slinging his satchel about his shoulder by the long strap with which it was provided, left the house, and, mounting his horse, rode away from Los Muertos, never to return. Presley came out upon the county road. At a little distance to his left he could see the group of buildings where once Broderson had lived. These were being remodeled, at length, to suit the larger demands of the new agriculture. A strange man came out by the road gate, no doubt the new proprietor. Presley turned away, hurrying northward along the county road by the mammoth watering tank and the long windbreak of poplars. He came to Caraher's place. There was no change here. The saloon had weathered the storm, indispensable to the new as well as to the old regime. The same dusty buggies and buckboards were tied under the shed, and as Presley hurried by he could distinguish Caraher's voice, loud as ever, still proclaiming his creed of annihilation. Bonneville Presley avoided. He had no associations with the town. He turned aside from the road, and crossing the northwest corner of Los Muertos and the line of the railroad, turned back along the upper road till he came to the Long Trestle and annexters. Silence, desolation, abandonment. A vast stillness, profound, unbroken, brooded low over all the place. No living thing stirred. The rusted windmill on the skeleton-like tower of the artesian well was motionless, the great barn empty, the windows of the ranch-house, cook-house, and dairy boarded up. Nailed upon a tree near the broken gateway was a board, white-painted, with stenciled letters, bearing the inscription, "Warning. All persons found trespassing on these premises will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, by order P. and S.W.R.R." As he had planned, Presley reached the hills by the headwaters of Broderson's Creek late in the afternoon. Toilfully he climbed them, reached the highest crest, and turning about, looked long and for the last time at all the reach of the valley unrolled beneath him. The land of the ranches opened out forever and forever under the stimulus of that measureless range of vision. The whole gigantic sweep of the San Joaquin expanded titanic before the eye of the mind, flagellated with heat, quivering and shimmering under the sun's red eye. It was the season after the harvest, and the great earth, the mother, after its period of reproduction, its pains of labor, delivered of the fruit of its loins, slept the sleep of exhaustion in the infinite repose of the Colossus, benignant, eternal, strong, the nourisher of nations, the feeder of an entire world. And as Presley looked, there came to him strong and true the sense and the significance of all the enigma of growth. He seemed for one instant to touch the explanation of existence. Men were nothings, mere animalcules, mere ephemerides that fluttered and fell and were forgotten between dawn and dusk. Vanamee had said there was no death. But for 1 second Presley could go one step further. Men were not, death was not, life was not. Force only existed, force that brought men into the world, force that crowded them out of it to make way for the succeeding generation, force that made the wheat grow, force that garnered it from the soil to give place to the succeeding crop. It was the mystery of creation, the stupendous miracle of recreation. The vast rhythm of the seasons, measured, alternative, the sun and the stars keeping time as the eternal symphony of reproduction swung in its tremendous cadences like the colossal pendulum of an almighty machine,